Matt Dumba's departure has led to another intriguing discussion. Who gets that other A? We'll discuss the potential contenders on today's episode of Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day of the week. If you are a first-time listener to Locked on Wild, we welcome you in. Make sure you take the time to subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any great content throughout the rest of the offseason. If you're an everydayer who tunes in every single day of the week, and that is how we got today's topic, by the way, is from one of our everydayers. We are glad to have you and hope you stick with us here as we move towards the start of next season. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. On today's episode of Locked on Wild, we discuss potential alternate captains for the Minnesota Wild. After Matt Dumba departed, the Wild have an opening in that spot, so we'll look at some of the names that should be strongly considered for the alternate captain spot. My name is Seth Topal, your daily Minnesota Wild insider, and big shout out to one of our everydayers, Travis, coming up with this topic for today's episode, and it is a great one, as we are going to look at who should be considered for alternate captain for the Minnesota Wild and why. Obviously, Matt Dumba leaving has opened up the potential for Brock Faber to slide into his spot in the top four on defense. But I don't think Brock Faber is going to be the one wearing the alternate captain A for the Minnesota Wild this season. The Wild have, over the last couple of seasons, had both Matt Dumba and Marcus Foligno. They've had a bunch of alternate captains throughout the course of their history. Most notably, over the last several seasons, it was Zach Parise and Ryan Suter. But now an opportunity to give somebody else an opportunity to wear that A. Let's start with the most logical candidate because he is essentially next in line, Joel Eriksson Ek. And with either Marcus Foligno or Matt Dumba out of the lineup, Eriksson Ek has in the past been the one to fill that spot. And it makes sense in a ton of other ways as well, because his work ethic, second to none, the things that he does to get himself prepared to be one of the best players on this team is something that you would model for younger players coming up, and the Wild are going to have a ton of them over the next few seasons. He would be a great spot to point to and say, hey, if you guys want a great example of how to be successful at the NHL level, just look at what Joel Eriksson Ek does. That has become kind of the signature leadership point for this franchise, has been the lead by example approach. Jared Spurgeon, not the most vocal of captains, leads by example, lets his play on the ice do the talking, but he has also created an environment that is super accommodating to new players, particularly young players, getting the chance and getting called up to play on the NHL roster, in a lot of cases for the first time. And so Eriksson Ek's mannerisms, his style would fit in perfectly with that type of leadership that this team has cultivated. And to take it a step further, Eriksson Ek on the ice is as gamer as they come. We hear stories from players across the NHL at just how much a pain he is to play against. And so that is another great example of lead by example, especially with the Wild trying to instill that type of mentality in a lot of their players. And so having somebody who has done it before, having somebody who is a long-term part of this franchise in Joel Eriksson Ek makes a ton of sense. And he is somebody that is just, you use the term student of the game a lot. He's somebody that just knows the ins and the outs of what it takes. He's involved in a lot of different processes on this team, from being on offense, helping out on defense, when he is out there on the ice, power play, penalty kill. He has his hands in a lot of different roles on this team. And so if you're looking for somebody to fill that alternate captain spot, Joel Eriksson Ek would be a fantastic choice for this team to be part of that next grouping of leadership. And Dumba has been a part of this team for a long time. He was a part of this team for quite a while and was an alternate captain, was part of kind of that old guard of leadership on this team. Jared Spurgeon, I think, qualifies in that grouping as well. And with Joel Eriksson Ek, still being a relatively young player, it's a great opportunity to mix old guard and new guard together with the prospects that this team is going to have coming up through the system. It's a perfect way to just meet in the middle and make sure that everybody is accommodated that this team is going to have coming up. It's not going to be a ton of free agent signings over the next few years. It's going to be younger players that are coming in to fill spots. So somebody who can kind of bridge the gap for those players, somebody who also is intense when he's out there on the ice, but somebody that I think can show a little bit of that other side of the game. He certainly has done enough in terms of social media, videos that the team puts out. Eriksson Ek has, to where I think that would fit in as well. And let's not leave out the fact that he tried to work his way back from a broken leg to play in the postseason and set himself up to even attempt it. Just shows that his work ethic, his on-ice ability, it's really the whole package for what he brings to this team. And so I think if you're having a conversation as to leadership, alternate captains, I think Joel Eriksson Ek has to be at the top, if not in the conversation, for who would be most worthy of donning that A. So there are certainly a couple of other candidates as well, as we will discuss, but Joel Eriksson Ek, I think, is a perfect way to lead this discussion, lead it and get it going. Now, those of you tuning in, if you have ideas while this episode's going on of other players that we missed, because we're going to focus mainly on 3, leave it in the comments, and we will certainly discuss other potentials as we roll. But Joel Eriksson Ek, I think, is one for me as to who should be the alternate captain for this team going forward. Now, you could go the route of old guard, as is the case with our next player, and somebody who has been around this franchise for quite a bit, somebody who is pretty darn good on the defensive side of the ice. And so we will consider our second option, Jonas Brodin, as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Are you tired of feeling restricted in your shorts? Want to look good and feel comfortable at the same time? Look no further than Bird Dogs, the ultimate solution for every single person out there. Bird Dogs stretch khaki shorts are specifically designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and the leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. You can say goodbye to those baggy, shapeless shorts and hello to the confidence of a tailored fit. Here's the secret, though. Bird Dog shorts do the exact same thing as those other big-name brands, but they fit so much better. I can't emphasize enough how much it feels like you're wearing a hug every second you have Bird Dogs on. No more compromising on comfort or style. They've revolutionized shorts by inventing cloud knit fabric, a magical blend that looks just like khaki but stretches, allowing you to move freely while maintaining a slim and stylish appearance. There is more when you order at birddogs.com/lockedonnhl, you will get a free Yeti style tumbler with your first order. Take a look at that again. birddogs.com/lockedonnhl. If you want to start to feel the ultimate comfort in your shorts, head to Bird Dogs and get started today. Continuing today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, we are going to continue to look at redrafts of the NHL drafts all the way back to 2000. We started with 2000 and talked about the potential to not have Marian Gaborik. So we're going to continue to move through those, but we're also going to incorporate some rankings as we move through the rest of the offseason as well. We'll rank positions throughout the course of Minnesota Wild history. So be on the lookout for that. We'll get that series started up here this week as well. Alternate captains. We talked about Joel Eriksson Ek as kind of the top choice. Joel Eriksson Ek's my one for an alternate captain for this coming season. But if you want to go with a little bit more of the old guard, I think you got to consider Jonas Brodin as well. Brodin's been with this team his entire career. He, as has Jared Spurgeon, have been just extremely underrated defensemen throughout the course of their career. I don't think anybody that watches the Minnesota Wild will ever get tired of seeing Brodin hold Connor McDavid scoreless and just follow him around like he's a defensive back shutting down a number one wide receiver in the NFL. His ability to play on the ice, his intensity while he's out there on the ice is certainly one to model to younger players. Because let's take the opportunity as well to consider the things that we want in the leadership for this team as we go forward. You want somebody that can show your young players what you're expecting out on the ice and how to do it. Jonas Brodin is one of the top players on this team in being able to do that. He's been incredibly consistent throughout the course of his career. And so he would be, I think, a great choice for this team to just continue to kind of usher in this new leadership group. The other part, too, is that he's locked in for a few more seasons, so it's not like you're going to have to turn around and make changes again next year. Now, granted, same thing for Joel Eriksson Ek, but with Marcus Foligno set to become a free agent next year, there's potential that his A will be coming up due as well. But looking at Brodin and what he is able to do on a year-in, year-out basis, and just I think one of the big themes that I like about Brodin's game is knowing what needs to happen and just going out and doing it. It doesn't have to always be the flashiest or the most highlight reel type plays, but think about how many times we've seen Brodin in odd man rush situations or on the power play or just even on defense in general, be able to just come out of nowhere, get a stick on a puck, go into a dive, and just come up with a winning play. Winning plays, another thing to take into consideration for alternate captain. But Brodin's got the longevity. He is just an absolute fixture on this team. He's an integral part of this team's success. And so you can put a lot of that importance into your pick for alternate captain too, as somebody who could be more part of that old guard as well. So I think Jonas Brodin would also be a fantastic choice. Now, I still, if I'm ranking them, I still put Joel Eriksson Ek above Jonas Brodin. I think it's clearly 1 and 2 there, but if they did end up going to Jonas Brodin to fill Matt Dumba's A, I would not have any reservations about that choice because he clearly is one of the leaders of this team. Now, again, more of a player that is lead by example which again, you can go the route of having the more vocal player, but the Wild have one of those in Pat Maroon. And so you can have somebody that does all that without having it from your leadership group. Now, in the events of what we've seen the last couple of seasons from the Minnesota Wild in playoff losses where things fall apart and there just doesn't seem to be an ability to get back on track, in those instances, I feel as though having somebody who is vocal about what's going wrong and what needs to be fixed comes in handy. And so maybe you want to have somebody that is a little more vocal. Foligno is certainly more of a vocal player, so he can probably help in that aspect by being the other alternate captain. But there are plenty of guys who could, I think, fill this role given the opportunity. Now, Brodin, more of the old guard. There's one more player who I think can help with that young guard mentality. And he's a player that is certainly a fixture point in this franchise and where this franchise hopes to go. And so why don't we just give Kirill Kaprizov the alternate captain already? We'll talk about the merits of that as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Take your first swing at betting Major League Baseball on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets, up to $200. That's right, just $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over, under, to who you think is going to hit the first home run. Second half of the Major League Baseball season is going to be underway. And folks, if you're betting on the Minnesota Twins, here's a little tidbit for you. The Twins have the easiest schedule in the second half, which means it's likely, hopefully, that the offense will get going. So keep that in mind as you look to the second half of the season on FanDuel, an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet Major League Baseball than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, once again, make sure that you tune in as we continue our ongoing series, Locked On Wild Investigates, as we'll take a look at the redrafts of drafts throughout the Minnesota Wild's history. And we'll also start to do the Locked On Wild Rankem series, taking a look at all-timers from Minnesota Wild history and ranking them to see how everything plays out. So we've got some ongoing content for you, of course. When we get news on Philip Gustafson and Brandon Duhaime, we will definitely make sure to have you covered there as well. Either way, make sure that you subscribe and follow us on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out when that news does break. Is it time to just give Kirill Kaprizov the alternate captain already? It's pretty clear that Kaprizov is this team's franchise player. You don't have to be a hockey expert to know that. He is the straw that stirs the drink. He is the cup that holds the drink. He is the ice that chills the drink. And in the instances in which both Matt Dumba and Marcus Foligno have been out of the lineup, which has happened, it's been Kirill Kaprizov who has been in to fill in the event that two alternate captains are needed. So he's clearly starting to move in that leadership direction. One of the things that I think I enjoyed most about hearing from Wild prospects such as Danila Yurov at development camp is that Kirill Kaprizov checks in on those guys. And that is something you want in one of your star players, is somebody who knows what's going on with the organization and wants to be the resource point for those guys as they come over here. And I liked the fact too that there was a little bit of starstruck feeling from Yurov at being texted by Kirill Kaprizov, but having somebody that does that and just wants to know how these guys are doing as they get closer to making an impact on this NHL roster shows that he is vested in what's going on. That's the sign of a leader. Now, his on the ice play is second to none. He has the electric speed, the show-stopping ability in scoring. Anytime he's on the ice, you're watching as a fan to allow him the opportunity to show you something that you've never seen before. But we're starting to see some of the other parts of his game really unlock as well. And we know the attention to detail he puts into the game, his work ethic to put himself in situations to carry this team. He did plenty of that throughout this season and has done plenty of that throughout the course of his career. And so another player that if you are looking for somebody to point to for prospects coming up into this system, Kirill's got to be up near the top of the list as well, because he is able to kind of seamlessly integrate the flashiness, the style to his game, but he is not afraid to go get you when he's out there on the ice. He's not afraid to mix it up. He is not afraid to do some of the dirty work that isn't the flashiest, doesn't move the needle, doesn't find its way into the box score. He does all of that as well, and I think that's a perfect lesson for some of these players that think they can come up to the NHL level and just do one thing. Now, he is continuing to work on some of that as he grows, but I think we have seen just this bulldog mentality from Kaprizov start to just grow and grow and grow. And so you put him on the short list if you've got a guy like Liam Ogren, who is going to be coming up soon, Danila Yurov, some of those other prospects that'll be making their debuts before too long. Who are they going to want to emulate? Well, it's going to be Kirill Kaprizov. And so I think a perfect way to go even a little bit of new guard, to have somebody that you can really, future contract negotiations aside, somebody that you can really have be the leader for what is going to be your next core. Kirill would be the way to go about it there. If we're kind of kicking the can down the road 2 paces instead of just to next season, and even beyond that, Kaprizov, I think at some point, he may even be the successor when Marcus Foligno ends up leaving to wear that alternate captain spot. I think he's got all the skills leadership-wise. We saw him this year start to take more of an active role in talking to the press after games. And so that is another part of it as well, as somebody who can face the media, somebody who can face the critics when things don't go right. He's getting that part of his game figured out as well. So I think Kaprizov would be another fine choice for alternate captain for this team. Now, one player I wanted to mention as well, because I think he's moving on this same trajectory himself. Don't discount Matt Boldy becoming an alternate captain at some point during his career. I think we saw some really good growth and maturity from Boldy this year. Yes, he's still very young, so he's got all of this to develop in front of him. But we saw some ownership and accountability and maturity from Boldy that I think really plays well into this leadership aspect too. So maybe not next year, maybe not the year after, but some point down the line, I think we can expect that Matt Boldy will be part of that leadership group as his career continues to unfold. So if you ask me to make a selection based off of what we've discussed today, I'm going with Joel Eriksson Ek. I think he represents everything on the ice you would want. And Bill Guerin has said pretty much just that several times throughout the offseason, and mentioned that after the draft was done is you look at some of those things, some of those characteristics that Eriksson Ek brings to the table. That's what they want in players. So Joel Eriksson Ek, I think, is the logical choice here. But again, if you go Jonas Brodin, if you even go Kirill Kaprizov, I think you've got fine choices, whichever way you end up deciding to go. But I think that's another good reminder, too, for this team is that there are solid leaders on this group. And this is something that Bill Guerin has been cultivating since he came here, is a locker room that has guys that are able to be those leader points for when the prospects come up here, those younger players come up, so that there is a system in place and they can just blend seamlessly right in. So that'll do it for today's episode of Locked On Wild. Again, if this is your first time tuning into Locked On Wild, we are so glad to have you along. Make sure you take the time to subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new content as we move through the rest of the offseason. If you're one of the everydayers, and again, thank you to Travis, one of our everyday listeners, for coming up with today's idea for our topic. If you have anything that you would like to see discussed in future Locked On Wild episodes, make sure to leave them in the comments or follow us on Twitter at Locked On Wild, and we will make sure to get to them here in a future episode. You can find everything that we have to offer on your favorite podcast platforms and also on YouTube. So hit subscribe. Better yet, turn those notifications on so you don't miss out when new episodes break. We have new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.